Towards the end of World War II, American B-29 high-altitude bombers struck into the heart of Japan. But what followed brought the Japanese a nightmare unequaled in history, one of the most horrendous firestorms ever. Charles Phillips was a B-29 bomber pilot in the skies over Tokyo. This is where he witnessed the fires of hell on the battlefront. After 4 years of fighting the Japanese, Americans realized that the only way to get the enemy to submit would be by bombing their homeland. Since there is no base close enough to Japan, B-29 bombers, the latest in the arsenal of aerial weaponry, fly from Chengdu, China. It's a long and arduous flight. But the B-29 is the key to American air strategy. These revolutionary, heavily armed bombers, the largest produced in the war, are capable of flying at altitudes of 38,000 feet and are able to carry payloads up to 15,000 pounds. Finally, the Americans get a foothold in the Mariana Islands in 1944 and build air bases for long-range bombers. It's only 1,500 miles to Japan. It isn't a moment too soon for Charles Phillips, who pilots a B-29.
The Chinese operation was a nightmare of logistics. Everything that was used by the B-29 from those remote bases near Chengdu, China, had to be airlifted over the Himalaya mountains, the tallest mountains in the world. So as soon as an airfield could be prepared on the island of Tinian, General LeMay ordered them to relocate from where they were and come on over to Tinian.
On November 24th, the first wave of superfortresses takes off for Japan in a series of raids designed to bring the Japanese people to their knees. Meanwhile, back in the United States, more and more men are being rushed through training. Most of the men are impressed with the new bomber, but it's still highly classified and they are restricted by tight security. For the pilots, though, the plane's enormous size presents its own problems.
The B-29 would weigh 70 tons, 140,000 pounds, and you always hoped that every one of the engines would perform well, because the takeoff was the most critical part of the entire mission.
Trainees are briefed in all aspects of flying the new B-29s, but until they're in battle, it's all theoretical. New planes are fitted and readied for flying to bases in Guam and the Marianas. Since the Japanese have lost so many planes in other battles, fighter pilots are reassigned to ground crews and anti-aircraft batteries.
Japanese air and naval forces were depleted, both through combat losses and training accidents. The Japanese, by this time, were trying to withhold some of their best pilots for forthcoming battles. So many of the pilots were young, new recruits. The problem that the Japanese had with air defense over the homeland is that they simply had no integrated system to defend the skies over Japan. As far as their air force, there were only 2 night fighter units, that is about 40 aircraft total, available for the defense of all of Tokyo.
As soon as B-29s are spotted, the gunners go into action, but the bombers are too high for their shells.
The early missions were made in formation. They were all made in daylight. They would have to form up in formation. They would have to climb to above 30,000 feet and then work their way into the target. There were these great high-altitude winds blowing. So the result was that they didn't hit a whole lot of targets real accurately.
The B-29 was a formidable weapon, certainly against the average Japanese plane. I mean, they would find themselves outgunned and dwarfed by this behemoth.
In daylight, it was a typical formation would be 9 aircraft with a leader and a deputy leader, and there were 3 groups of 3. The closer that they could fly together, the better they could defend themselves from fighter attacks. In the high altitude attacks against Japan, the Japanese fighters had a terrible time because they couldn't keep up. They had to loiter out ahead of the formation and then make passes that would take them into the next formation and on and on. They could not make a tail chase and hope to catch up with us. B-29 was just too fast for them.
By the beginning of 1945, the B-29 raids are more accurate and are having a major effect on Japanese war production, adding to the threat of approaching American forces and the loss of important foreign bases. As the B-29 raids intensify, Japan's defense measures become desperate. Over 8 million children and non-essential urban dwellers are evacuated to the country. Those who remain are mobilized into civilian defense brigades. Slogans such as 100 million, one mind are commonplace. But the average Japanese, faced with destruction at home and defeat abroad, have begun to lose trust in the military leaders. Only for the emperor do they reserve their wholehearted respect and devotion. He embodies the Yamato spirit, for which the Japanese will make any sacrifice, including life itself.
The Japanese have an expression, shikata ganai, which means it's inevitable. It cannot be helped. By early 1945, many of the Japanese probably did look on the war as something that was shikata ganai. It was something that was happening to them and around them, but something that they were powerless to do anything about. The Japanese had seen the war take a steady toll on their quality of food, quality of clothing, and they had also seen their health care deteriorate. In other words, all of the things that people work for had steadily deteriorated throughout the course of the war.